Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dursey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today, we will hear the presentation, Emerging Practices for Local Approval of EV Charging Stations. For technical questions related to the presentation, just go ahead and type those in your Q&A box. I'll do my best to answer those. And for your questions related to the presentation, again, just type them in the Q&A box. We will get to them at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. I will ask that if your question is for a particular panelist, that you just let me know in the question who you want to answer it. It just helps me out. All right, today we are sponsored by the APA Transportation Planning Division. So thanks for joining us and being a longstanding member and for hosting today's session. Y'all are here just a little bit more about them coming up here in a minute. Up on your screen is a list of our next 3 upcoming sessions. So we're really excited for these. You can register for them and all of our sessions by heading over to ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Today's session has been approved for 1.5 CM credits and one of the sustainability and resilience credits that are required. So to log your credits, head over to planning.org, log into your My APA account. From there, you can search by today's title or event number, both of which again can be found on our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Be sure to like us on Facebook if you're on social media. That's where I post any important date or time changes, when new sessions are available for you to register for, etc. Secondly, we record all of our sessions and we post them onto our YouTube channel. So head over to YouTube and just search in Planning Webcast, and we'll pop up along with our well over 500 session recordings, all available to you for free. So if you subscribe to our channel, you'll get notified when new sessions have been uploaded and are available for you to view. Again, you can get all this information and all of our upcoming sessions, everything you need, you can find at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mackenzie Love, who is representing the Transportation Planning Division, just to give a quick hello and introduction. Mackenzie.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you for being here and all the work it takes to get those 500 sessions. Amazing. My name is Mackenzie Love, and I'm a Senior Program Manager and Transportation Planner for the Great Plains Institute. I'm also the Vice Chair of Chapter Outreach and the lead of the Equity Committee for the APA's Transportation Planning Division. And I wanted to thank everyone who's on this call for attending. We do our level best to support our practicing planners in any way that we can. So it just means so much to us that you find our content valuable enough to spend your afternoon this way. So thank you, thank you. We also like to support our members through things like our Policy Advisory Committee, regular publication of the State of Transportation Planning, which is a document we put out every few years, and our leadership in creating and maintaining the Planners Day of Service event. And many of those ideas and more come from the members of our division, and so we're always open to feedback. A great place for you to provide some of that feedback or any ideas that you might have, really, we love the ideas, would be during the National Planning Conference that's coming up between April 13th and 16th in Minneapolis. TBD will be hosting our annual business meeting and followed by a mixer on the 14th. And because we know how hard you all work, we're also going to throw in some fun things like a walk with a coffee hour and even commuter yoga, where you can learn how to do yoga for those bus and train rides to the office. And we'll be posting details about what days and times and locations all of those will take place in our monthly e-blast and on our social media. Now, if you're not signed up for those updates, it'd be great if you could, because they're pretty wonderful throughout the year. But I would also welcome you emailing me directly after this session, and I'll make sure that you get every piece of information that you need, because we would be glad to have you in any instance. That's it from me on the TPD, but I'm happy to take any questions anytime at a later date, and I'll hand it back over to Christine for some polling.
Great. So we're just going to do a couple polling questions. Our panelists would just like to see who's on the line. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our first question. It will just pop right up on your screen. And I always say this to our panelists, I never remember if you're allowed to vote or not. So if you don't see it, I promise it's happening. So our first question, they just want to know, where are y'all from? What part of the country? And while you're answering this, I'll just let you know that if you are on a mobile device, sometimes pop-ups are disabled for security purposes, and you might not be able to vote. So I'm sorry if you're on a mobile device. I'll give it another second here. Oh, wow. Y'all, they're from everywhere. We got such a good cross section. I'm going to go ahead and end our poll here, and then I'll share the results. So 26% are from the Northeast, 25 from the Midwest, 20 from Southeast, Pacific Coast, we got 11%, Southwest 6%, Mountain West 10%. Hello, other, from wherever you are internationally, we welcome you. Okay, so that's that. That's where we're all from. I'm going to go ahead and go back and launch our second questions here. Okay. Have you updated your zoning ordinance to accommodate EV charging? And I already know the answer to this, just from all that we're going through at the Ohio chapter. I'm sure there's at least like 200 people from Ohio on this line. We've got a lot going on. Okay, I'll give it another second. This is interesting. Okay. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So not surprisingly, almost 50% of folks said that nope. 17% said yes. Honestly, I'm a little surprised at that number. That's great. I want to reach out to all of you and talk to y'all about that. 12% in process, and then 22%, I just don't know. I'm not sure. So we're going to go ahead and stop sharing, and I'm going to launch that last poll, and then we'll dive in. Okay, have you approved fast charger permits in your community in the last year? So we're asking for you to tell us how many fast charger permits. I'll give it another second. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Okay, 54% say, I don't know. 37% say 0 to 5, and then a little smattering in between. So that's the end of the polling, and this is perfect timing for me to get more hot liquid for my voice trouble that I'm having here from allergies. Thank you, Cleveland, for that. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that Ed can jump on and get us started.
Okay, good afternoon. Let me know if you cannot see my screen. Okay.
Yeah,
so
you're good to go. It looks great.
Okay. So
Yep.
Ed Gilliland, Senior Director with the Interstate Renewable Energy Council. And I'm going to talk with you today about the guidance we developed over a 9-month period on planning and zoning for EV charging deployment. And primarily, I won't be able to talk about everything we developed through the guidance, but we're going to focus today on planning, zoning, and parking. This process started about 1.5 years ago when we got together with a working group. We developed an EV charging working group, which I'll talk about more in a minute, but clearly everybody was concerned about the challenge for the process to permit and approve electric vehicle charging. It would take often, or it does take often, up to 6 months or longer. It is, of course, a new topic for many local officials, and there are thousands of local officials around the country. So each process is and can be different, which also makes it a challenge for the electric vehicle service providers that are trying to install these stations. So we worked on trying to develop a predictable, transparent process with consensus standards and educational materials and checklist. The group was part of the Interstate Renewable Energy Council. My we'd had a Sustainable Energy Action Committee, and it had like a dozen working groups. One of them was the Electric Vehicle Charging Working Group, and it was comprised of EV charging providers, local and planning professionals. And I want to thank the sustainable community participants that took part in our group, our Sustainable Community Division participants who took part in our group. We had a number of internal drafts over multiple, over 8 or 9 months. And then we released the report to a larger group. We called it the exposure draft and got a lot of great feedback. And so this document has gotten a lot of participants, a lot of stakeholder engagement, and we do appreciate that very much. So what exactly are we talking about? So here we have a sort of a diagram of what we look at the universe of local EV readiness. And you can see on the left side, the blue circles or items that local governments or localities can undertake to improve the growth of electric vehicles and charging stations. The green things on the right are the things that where you interface with the grid and all of the utility issues and state regulatory issues that also have an impact on the success of EV charging. And we're looking at local regulatory approval in the middle. And specifically, we're looking at the orange circles. So we are focusing on planning and zoning, development regulations, and the approval process itself. We are less focused on the building, electrical, and fire codes. And when we met with industry representatives in the working group, they made it very clear that the planning and zoning review is typically more challenging than the building and electrical codes. So that's the reason for our focus. Here again, we break it down into really the documents, and we focus on plans, zoning ordinances, and the approval process, less so on the building codes. So this is the rough outline of our guidance, and we encourage you to look at. There's a lot of good background information in it, and then the meat of it is this regulatory requirements guidance section, and it really focuses on the planning, the zoning, parking, design, aesthetics, equipment location, and we tried to also address a particularly sticky problem, which is on-street charging. And so, and then also, as I mentioned, and here's that same yellow diagram out on this slide, and we also add here the approval process, application process, and review. So today we'll focus on planning, zoning, and parking. And not all aspects of parking. We're just going to be able to have time to focus on parking counts today. So we'll start with the planning documents. And of course, don't need to tell you guys, but planning matters. And often officials or people not in the planning profession are not, of course, always convinced that. But as we go out and talk about this guidance, we want to definitely make the case that planning matters, because it is the broad guidance that has a major impact on how the more granular documents, such as the zoning code, are going to be developed. And of course, those more granular documents will have a direct impact on the regulatory process. So We're looking at the comprehensive plan and the supporting plans. Certainly, during the planning process, we all know that there will be a lot of stakeholder engagement. And I want to note two particular stakeholder groups here that are important for EV charging. First of all, the regional planning organizations. They are, of course, very engaged in transportation, and so can be very instrumental as the process of EV charging and transportation are discussed. They're often a conduit of federal funds for transportation. And then they can also be important for a region with a lot of municipalities that have, say, limited staff capacity. They don't have the time to really get in the weeds of EV charging. Perhaps in many cases, these regional organizations can provide the technical assistance and support to really help them. We certainly, one other sort of planning importance is to look at your existing and proposed locations for public charging, look at the demand by use case, but also consider the residents who are going to lack access to off-street parking. And many other, some of the more disadvantaged neighborhoods, they're going to have other challenges related to adopting electrical vehicles and the charging. So I want to talk about zoning and use designation. And looking at zoning, we're going to, we'll talk briefly about the code, accessory use, discretionary reviews, and primary use. So main thing certainly is to address EV charging in the zoning code. Now, we recognize that there are many smaller communities that would not subject an EV charging application to planning and zoning review. So this would not necessarily apply to those communities. You're going to have the building codes official or the electrician look at it and sign off on the health and safety of the charging application. But many communities will subject EV charging applications to planning and zoning review. In that case, it is very important to address EV charging in the zoning code. And hopefully in a few years, the 49% that's responded that is not currently being addressed will have time to do so. Of course, if it is not addressed in the zoning code, then it's more likely to be subject to uncertainty, more time consuming for the locality to go through and figure out how to review it, how to approve it, and more time for the charging company provider to in the experience of the application process. So first thing, addressing the code and certainly include the administration and procedures part of the code, which talks about when a zoning application might be subject to discretionary review, under what conditions, so you can tell the electric vehicle providers, service providers, what they can expect when they apply. Accessory use, we really encourage, and this seemed to be very unanimous with the group, to allow accessory use EV charging by right in all zones. It should have a relatively low impact on the property and surrounding neighborhoods. So hopefully most communities can really allow it as a by right use. So more addressing discretionary reviews and zoning. Certainly this is something we encourage that localities avoid if at all possible. Certainly there are going to be cases where they might have to do a conditional use permit. And again, in those cases, it's really important to be able to outline from the beginning to the charging provider or installer what the conditions are that would trigger a conditional use permit. But in most cases, and particularly with accessory use, we would suggest that that could be avoided so that you don't have to go through the public hearings, a zoning commission, or city council approval. You can avoid this time-consuming process. Site plan review is, of course, another process that often triggers discretionary reviews with public hearings and the zoning commission. Again, it can be very time consuming, taking months or even years. And we would suggest that for an EV charging application where somebody wants to put some chargers in a surface parking lot of a shopping center, this would or should not trigger this level of review. Many communities have set up more minor site plan review processes that can be approved administratively, and that would certainly be the more preferred alternative. There are going to be times when electric vehicle charging is clearly a primary use, and we are seeing more and more charging hubs being developed, and so this is going to be more and more of a concern or an issue. We would suggest that the guidance would suggest that it be allowed as an approved use in commercial zones and defined as its own use, not as a traditional fueling station. So earlier I talked about the fact that a fueling gas station is often a conditional use. It often requires a conditional use permit. And so we would suggest here that we define EV charging station as its own use, so that it's not clumped together with gas stations and thus subject to a conditional use permit. So in summary, address EV charging in the code, allow us an accessory use by right in all zones. When clearly a primary use, allow it as an approved use. And so you can approve administratively and avoid the discretionary reviews. And of course, to do all of this, in many cases, it's going to require an update of the zoning code. Now, of course, I want to talk briefly about parking. We have three categories of parking, but I'm going to talk about the parking count and mandates. So, of course, many localities just set minimum parking requirements based on land use. And unfortunately, the trend is to reduce those requirements. You want to encourage more travel by transit, bike, and on foot. But the challenge here is that when you convert existing spaces to dedicated EV charging spaces, then it may be viewed as a violation of the minimum parking requirements. So we would suggest that we avoid or allow existing spaces to be converted to EV charging spaces to count towards minimum parking mandates. In addition, for accessible charging spaces, we would suggest they count as 2 parking spaces in determining the minimum parking requirement. So as we know, accessible spaces are typically require more square footage than a normal parking space, a regular parking space. So we want to make accommodation for accessible vehicles to make use of electric vehicle charging. So we want to allow them more space in this computation. And then there are going to be times when their parking space reductions will be needed to house related equipment. And we would suggest these be also count towards the minimum parking requirements. Okay. So that's the end of my discussion here. I'm happy to look forward to the questions. I have my name down there, also the contact from RMI, who we developed this report in conjunction with RMI and of course, the SEAC, Sustainable Energy Action Committee. So looking forward to questions. So let me stop my share. And then I want to turn it over to Tessa Sanchez from Tesla.
Thank you, Ed. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Just give me a moment here. And I'm going to put it in presenter view. All right, you should be all able to see my screen now. Great. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tessa Sanchez. I'm on the policy team at Tesla, where I focus on charging and energy policy. I also lead our local government affairs efforts. Prior to this, I worked at the city and county of San Francisco. Full disclosure, I am not a planner, but I've worked with many planners in the past, and really super appreciative of all the work that you all do. Today, I'm here to bring the charging developer perspective. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Tesla, our charging network, our goals to grow that network, and how we're working with local governments to do that. So at Tesla, our mission is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. That really does drive everything that we do. It spans from ensuring we're encouraging and supporting sustainable generation, and that we are creating technologies that transition our consumption to more efficient electrified options. So of course, we are known for our electric vehicles, but we also design and install solar generation products. We sell, install, and operate residential and grid scale energy storage products. And last, but certainly not least, we provide and operate charging infrastructure to ensure those EVs have the energy needed to support daily travel needs. So focusing in on EV charging, what we're here to talk about today, this covers a few different areas. So the best thing about electric vehicles is the gas station becomes your garage. For the vast majority of customers, they install home charging and they almost never have to stop for refueling outside of their home. It's a really good customer experience to get home with an empty tank and wake up full every morning. I saw a question in the chat about how long does it take to charge a vehicle. It really depends on the level of charging. So level 2 charging, can take anywhere from 2 to around 6 hours, and fast charging can be much quicker, around kind of an average of like 20 to 40 minutes. So an extension of that home level 2 charging is workplace charging, or charging anywhere where vehicles dwell for at least a couple hours. We call this at Tesla destination charging. And again, you can recharge where you park. You're not traveling somewhere or stopping somewhere just to refuel. Sometimes though, customers need fast charging. That is what we call supercharging. That could be for road trips, quick charging needs, those without charging at their home, a renter or someone who lives in a multi-unit dwelling. Here we're talking about, again, around 30 minutes, charging stops at locations around the country. So here in the US, supercharging makes up about 20% of our customers' daily charging. So while supercharging only makes up 20% of our customers' daily charging needs, this still translates to a lot of supercharging needed to support our over 2 million North America fleet and growing. This means we're building a lot of supercharging sites. So today we have over 20,000 supercharging posts across North America, with another 25,000 across other regions globally. And we are working to ramp to basically grow by 50% per year to keep up with demands. It means that we make up around 60% of charging infrastructure in North America. And again, this percentage is growing. So we provide over 1 million charging sessions per week. It's a pretty staggering number. And we're talking about larger and larger sites. For Tesla, our average site is around 13 posts. That really does depend regionally. There are certain regions where we build 30 to 40 post sites, and there are even some sites where we have over 100 posts. As we grow the scale, though, we are working to be as efficient as we possibly can. This means both building more cost effectively than our competitors. Typically, we're around 50%, if not a third of the costs of their installations. A lot of those reasons we can do this is that we make our own hardware in-house, and we've developed a pre-assembled infrastructure that can be dropped on site in a matter of days. It also means that we're making sure that we are only building the infrastructure truly needed by the EV fleet. So we know from industry studies that the top reasons people don't adopt EVs is due to charging and charging accessibility. So we are trying to make it as easy as possible for drivers to own and charge an electric vehicle. That's why we are opening our network to non-Tesla EVs to charge at supercharging and destination charging stalls across North America. Superchargers make up 3 out of 4 fast chargers and have really set the standard for EV charging in North America. The standard known as the North America Charging Standard, or NACS, has been adopted by nearly 100% of automakers, with manufacturers and charge point operators transitioning to NACS by 2025. So NACS is now also being standardized as J3400 by SAE, the Society of Automotive Engineers. So why are we doing this? Because it's all part of our mission. Charging access isn't being expanded fast enough, and EV adoption cannot accelerate at the levels it needs to if charging access does not scale accordingly. So this is our way of ensuring that the future is electric. So we have to keep pace with the expected pace of EV adoption going forward. And this really means working together as EV charging providers and utilities, and very importantly, local governments to ensure this critical infrastructure gets into the ground. Local governments, building departments and planners are really involved in the majority of the EV charging project development lifecycle, from the really beginning when we're doing due diligence on our end to final inspection before we open a site to the public. You all are one of our most critical partners, but we know that charging is a kind of a unique use case, and it can be a challenge for planners. Although we've been installing fast charging sites for more than a decade, not every city and town have encountered these types of projects. I think we saw that from our poll. And if they have, maybe only a handful of times. But this is about to change with the $7.5 billion in NEVI and CFI funding. That's part of the bipartisan infrastructure law for charging infrastructure. Requests for permit approvals are likely to increase dramatically in the next couple of years in your communities because of those federal and state funding programs. So local governments could encounter a major backlog of projects seeking approval if they are not prepared. So I've talked a lot about Tesla charging and what we've done and what we're doing to support the transition to electrification. So I think now the kind of question is, what can local governments, specifically planners, do to support EV charging? How can they prepare so they aren't caught off guard? So Ed talked to you a little bit about some of the best practices of other cities and states and kind of like what's recommended for EV charging, establishing that checklist, making sure EV charging is an allowed use, updating parking requirements, limiting review to health and safety. So from a planning perspective, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the biggest barriers we encounter with planning departments and how we might overcome them. So the first is updating zoning and land use codes. This can be a big holdup for a project if EV charging does not have a defined use. So I'll give an example. We have a site we're trying to develop in a town in South Florida. It's an 8-stall site set to be installed in a mall parking lot. And it has been stuck in the permitting process for 650 days and counting. So why? Because the town is struggling with how to classify our infrastructure. I mentioned it's a mall parking lot. Our charging stations would be accessory to the primary use of that lot. But because the town hasn't updated their code and isn't offering a variance or another pathway to approval, we're kind of stuck in limbo. So how could this be avoided? Really recommend updating those municipal zoning codes, those comprehensive documents to define all levels of EV charging, make it an allowed use, whether or not accessory or primary use, and lastly, eliminate the conditional use process. States and cities across the country have been leading on this. There are so many examples of model code language to choose from. The guide that Ed and the team developed with RMI have those examples in that report. Really recommend looking at that. The one thing I do recommend though on this topic is really to offer up developers a pathway while you do update those important city documents. We know it can take months, if not years, to update zoning and land use codes. Just please give us an option to move forward in the meantime. And lastly, I don't have it on this slide, but Ed mentioned aesthetics. Aesthetics can be a big hang up for some of our projects. You know, we all have this shared goal of making a safe and reliable site for people to come and visit and spend time at. The site owner, you know, who we do our lease agreements with, they also want an environment that has a really decent appearance, you know, and we know you all do as well. So we're here for the long haul. We want to be part of the community and we want to work with you on those practical design elements. But do ask, you know, that you minimize some of those requirements that add significant costs or a lot of complexity or really increased timelines. And please consider building in some flexibility into your process when it comes to design standards. So secondly, again, Ed touched on this a little bit, but we recommend counting EV charging toward parking minimums. I know that this can be a controversial item in some areas, but it can be a really big blocker for our projects. And in some cases, it could kill them altogether. So parking minimum requirements can really create barriers for charging stations if parking spaces are used for EV charging and associated equipment don't count towards the your parking minimum requirements. Parking stall loss can occur if a EV charging station triggers, you know, new landscaping or accessibility or parking dimension requirements. And additionally, if the electrical equipment, so like our transformers or our cabinets are restricted from locating in existing landscaping, that equipment does need to instead locate in an existing parking space. So we have an example here, a site in Louisiana. We're trying to install at the 16 stall site that will result in some general parking stall loss. It's been in permitting for about 100 days so far. And the planning department is concerned that our stalls will take away from parking from other customers of the facility. So, you know, can understand that perspective, but a couple data points there. You know, EV charging EV drivers are customers. Our real estate data shows that EV charging customers prefer to get out of their car while they get a charge and they visit and patriate the retail centers that those stations are located at. And then also city and states around the country are really recognizing that EV charging spaces are parking spaces in countless jurisdictions across the country, you know, Kansas City, Indianapolis, all jurisdictions in Colorado and California count EV charging and associated equipment towards parking minimum requirements and have that codified in their municipal codes. And lastly, last point here, local governments should coordinate and develop a plan with other departments and really prepare for the different types of EV charging installations you're going to see. So from home charging to fast charging. So for the most part, EV charging plans are going to be fairly routine, again, installed, you know, probably as an accessory use in a parking lot, but there could be, you know, more complex cases. Like one project we did in Southern California was a 40 stall supercharger site in a parking structure. It took 2 years to get through permitting. It involved multiple departments, many rounds of review. And although it was painful, both for us as a developer, as well as for the city, I think we learned a lot of kind of lessons from that project. You know, some of the key challenges that plagued it are what plague other cities on more standard projects. Lack of clarity on which departments need to be engaged, sequential review between those departments. So a lack of communication between reviewers and kind of visibility into the project status. and very importantly, a lack of documentation on EV charging specific permitting guidelines. So luckily, again, there are so many best practices out there and templates to follow. You all don't need to recreate the wheel if you don't want to. Nearly every jurisdiction in California has a checklist and an ordinance they follow to expedite EV charging. Sacramento is a really good example. They have a great checklist and also a really good process. Planning and reviews first. It's an all digital system. Planning issues clearances in about 2 days. And they also have a really great digital platform in their Acela permitting platform. We found that a quality municipal digital platform is a real difference maker. So talk to your fellow departments, sit down and think about the entirety of the process of approving an EV charging project. Talk to your fellow towns in your region, look for kind of cohorts to do this with. Look for best-in-class resources, develop your own, and then publish them on your websites so we can access them. So thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate the partnership with you all. And I'm going to pass it to Mackenzie.
Great, thank you, Tessa. And let me pull up my slides here. Actually, if you could take your slides down, I'll pull mine up. Awesome.
There you go.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, and I believe you all can see my slides now. Is that right?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. Thank you, Christine. Okay, well, hello, everyone. I know I introduced myself earlier. I'm Mackenzie Love, so I'll just take this time to introduce you to the Great Plains Institute, or GPI, as I'll refer to it, that I work for. You can see our vision and values and mission on the screen there, and I'd be happy to talk with anybody offline about these and our approach at any point. But what I really want you to take away from these screens is that we're a nonpartisan nonprofit that's been working on climate change for 25 years and making some big strides. I'll tell you about one of those in a little bit later in my presentation. And within that 25-year-long body of work, I'm part of a team that focuses specifically on communities because we feel that empowering those local leaders and supporting them in the great work that they're already doing is really what needs to happen to move a lot of the change that needs to happen at the national level forward effectively. So with that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about what that looks like in terms of transportation electrification, starting with our technical assistance program. GPI has created a technical assistance program for electrification that's based on a cohort model. And really, we do that with 3 pillars of that work. The first is providing the technical assistance in terms of one-on-one meetings, access to subject matter experts, both internal to GPI and external. We reach out to partners quite often, providing webinars and a series of guides and templates for their cohort members to access at any point. And I'll get a little bit more detailed on that in a few slides. The second pillar of our approach is to create cohorts of peers that can exchange information and best practices. You can kind of think of this as a phone a friend network. It's really great to have a coordinated group of folks that you know have similar experiences or needs as you, so that if you need to pass a piece of language and get it by your board for a zoning ordinance, you can call a similar peer community and ask for their insight and maybe what worked with their board. So our team sets up those connections, helps foster those relationships, and will make any subject-specific connections throughout the course of cohorts participation in the program. The third pillar of this model is to provide recognition through certification. This recognition is designed to just provide acknowledgement of the wonderful work that is being done. And it is based on some specific criteria that I'll break down in the next slides. So currently, GPI is working with 3 different cohorts, and they are serving over 50 communities across a couple of different geographic areas. The first focuses on Minnesota cities. Another cohort focuses on Native nations that are in the Midwest in terms of geography. And the third focuses on communities, be it cities or townships, in both Michigan and Ohio. These have been very popular opportunities because of the amount of technical assistance we offer, the access to experts, and those peer networks that we create for the phone a friend opportunities, all of which are available to participants free of cost. And in fact, in our Minnesota Cities cohort, we had such significant interest that we had to create two options for participating. First is that kind of light duty option in which participants get the technical assistance, access to guides and templates, participation in the peer networks. But there's also a full duty participation option in which folks also get a series of one-on-one meetings with GPI staff at their discretion. We did invite all participants to choose their type of participation, but just creating these two opportunities made it possible for GPI staff to serve many more communities within our funding that was available. So we were able to reach out to and work with about 45 cities in the state. Our other two cohorts, be that with the Native Nations and Michigan and Ohio, are currently under development and progress. But you can see with each of these cohorts, there are some differences across the needs and responsibilities of the communities and their political context. So we're learning a lot about how any guidance around electrification needs to be adaptable to different situations and making changes as appropriate as we learn from these cohorts, with the goal of taking it to a more national audience. So all of the technical assistance that we provide through this cohort model is based on the framework that you see on your screen. And I know it's complicated and the text is small, so I'll try to break it down a little bit. The framework is broken into 6 categories, which are planning, regulation, utility engagement, education and incentives, government operations, and shared mobility. And I'll just pause. The shared mobility category does include transit, paratransit, school buses, micromobility of all flavors, including bike share and scooter share, and as all of those can be electrified. So we try to make it as comprehensive as we can. And each of those 6 categories is then broken down into a series of best practices, which are comprised of a set of actions. So let me give you an example of what that could look like. If you were, say, looking at the planning category, we might say one of the best practices for electrifying transportation is to address EVs and charging infrastructure in a comp plan or comprehensive plan. And one action you could do to support that is to identify co-benefits like public health improvements, noise reduction, and pollution reduction in that comp plan. Now, each of those actions are kind of granular and they're assigned a predetermined value of points, and in some instances, equity points that a community can earn. And those point considerations are translated into a set of requirements that a community would need to complete to earn certification through this program. So the set of requirements for each certification level include a total number of points that a community needs to earn based on the actions that they complete, goals for undertaking those actions in an equitable manner, guidance on which categories in which points should be earned, and a few prescribed actions. So there are a couple of actions in this framework that we determined based on work with other subject matter experts and watching the impact of actions in the communities that have completed them. We've determined that those tend to be incredibly impactful. So we are asking a community to do those to achieve certification. For example, one of those is creating an electric vehicle permitting checklist, which I think supports what you've heard from both Ed and Tessa today. And that's just one example of the kind of alignments that we're trying to look for with other partners and subject matter experts in the field. Now, a lot of that sounded probably fairly prescriptive, but I want to highlight that it was important to us to retain flexibility within the requirements for certification so that communities could select actions from this framework you're seeing on your screen that meet the needs and desires of their people. We know that the local practitioners know their people best, so that was very important to us to retain it. Now, as I mentioned, it is a bit complex, so we want to make it as accessible as we can for communities to dive right in and feel supported in advancing the work. So the very first thing we do We give people access to the framework, but we know it can be overwhelming. So we start with self-assessment, which is an online portal in which community can share with us information about what they have already done in terms of electrification or any goals that they have going forward. You'll see a screenshot example of that on the left side of your screen. And then once a community has completed it, our staff reviews all of the information and how it compares to that certification framework and requirements. And we meet with the individual participant to set some goals with them, to talk about what they've already done, what's important, and how they can, what steps make sense for them to take next, and how that could align with them eventually achieving certification. We want it to be a back and forth dialogue and make it very easy for them to get started. And this self-assessment is a great tool for that purpose. It also gives us a point of analysis as communities move through the program to monitor progress on an individual community level and at the level of a cohort. So a dual purpose tool there. But that's just the first step. As I mentioned, we have a meeting with the community to talk over their self-assessment, but we also have other opportunities to meet with each community as they see fit. These include office hours in which we just make ourselves available for any member of the cohort that might want to ask questions, either us or their peers. But we also have midpoint meetings in which we touch base with each participant on how far they've come in their plan for achieving certification. If they're reaching any difficulties, we can also offer them more technical assistance or whatever they might need to help advance their goals. Finally, we'll have a closeout meeting to check in on everything that happened throughout the course of their participation and hopefully award their certification status. We find that communities really do put a lot of effort into this work, and so it's important to make sure that they are recognized for that. In addition to the opportunities to meet, we know that not everything happens exactly when meetings are available. So we make all of our technical assistance materials accessible on a website such that a participant can use them at any time that it becomes appropriate for them. You can see a screenshot of one of our current websites right there, and it provides an explanation of the certification program, any materials that we've posted, and also links to any webinars that we have recorded. There's also a portal for a community to request a meeting with GPI staff at any point. Some of the materials you might find on that site include things like the guides and templates I mentioned earlier. And these correspond directly to the actions in the framework that I showed you in the beginning of the presentation. Guides are long-form resources that provide granular information, guidance, best practices, in some cases, specific examples similar to case studies about a specific topic. For example, permitting process. That could be a document where you could go and look for specific templated text or places that you can look for precedents across the country. We also offer templates, which are more short form, think 1 to 5 pages. And these are really things that a community could fill out and edit as they see fit to publish quickly and get some of those basic actions for EV readiness completed. For example, we have a guide example on your screen for planning language, and we have another for creating an electric vehicle web page on a community website. So we have pre-existing bullets that you can fill in and text that you can modify to suit your community's needs, and some links to external resources that can be included to just get that process, to make that process just a little bit easier to complete. On a monthly basis, we offer webinars that will provide even more information about the topics in the framework, and in some cases go over those guides and templates specifically in any direction that might be important to use them. Each webinar is recorded and posted on our website, on our YouTube page, and on our resource center for the certification program. And the speakers for those include a mix of the subject matter experts that we work with across the country, GPI staff, and representatives of the specific cohort the webinar is designed for, to again reinforce the peer cohort model and give opportunities for those communities to share best practices with their neighbors. So once folks have taken in all of that guidance and done the work that they set out to do, we sit down with the communities to verify all of the actions completed. And we will do this in a couple of different ways. First is that we'll request they provide us documentation of the work that they've done, and GPI staff review it and compare it again to that framework and make an assessment on if all of the actions are satisfied. Then we'll have one-on-one meetings with those communities to discuss any gaps or any questions that we might have about actions that are taken, or any questions that they might have about work that they've done and how that relates to EV readiness and how can it further their hopes of certification. Then finally, we'll provide a final report and their certification status. So through this process, we have had some great success. I want to dive into our Minnesota Cities cohort, which is focused on small, rural, and underserved communities in greater Minnesota. We do have participating communities in the metro area, but we wanted to really put a lot of effort into supporting those communities that might be under-resourced in any way. So that was our focus. And many of the participants in this cohort have a population of 50,000 individuals or less. So we're really hoping to see those small communities be able to advance these electric vehicle readiness. And they have done a really great job. Some of the participants have started from scratch, from the ground up, and that is perfectly fine. The goal of our certification program and all of our technical assistance is to meet communities where they are right now. We do not require any electrification actions before you start work, just that you're ready to get started on it. So we have communities writing entirely new EV ordinances, and we have some others that had EV ordinances in place that maybe needed some tweaking, either because the market has developed quickly or there are new best practices in place. I know you heard Ed talk about some zoning best practices and some considerations around parking minimums and accessible parking, those kinds of things. As they come out, our staff keeps track of it and can advise any communities about maybe some changes they'd like to make to their ordinance, and we have seen that happen. We also see participants use the program as a way to advance general sustainability goals, and we see in the case that they already have those in place. There are some communities that are in a situation in which they need to advocate for the creation of sustainability goals or electrification progress, and so they're starting from a very different context, and we've seen some very small communities navigate that very, very well. And we've been just so proud to be part of their partnership in making those big moves. And I wanted to highlight, as we're doing all of this work, no matter where a community starts from, we're working with them to make concerted efforts to remove barriers for all of the members of their community to be able to benefit from EVs. And that is a requirement to earn their certification. With all of that in mind, I wanted to share with you a few exciting updates about future opportunities. GPI is now using that experience in developing technical assistance cohorts will be a foundation for a nationwide deployment called Charging Smart, which is led by IREC and in which GPI will be a lead partner. This is an exciting development that you are hearing. You're one of the first groups of folks to hear about it. So we'll be posting more about it through press releases soon. This work is funded by the Department of Energy, or the DOE, and phase 1 of the expansion will take place this spring. So we're very excited about the launch in a select group of states and regions, including Virginia, Colorado, Northern Texas, and Southern California. Phase 2 is anticipated to start later this year, and at that time, we will be taking the Charging Smart program nationwide. So keep your eyes open for updates. The Charging Smart program will incorporate many of the best practices from the cohort-based technical assistance I described to you already, but there will be updates to the structure of it and the framework based again on our lived experience and work with a really strong network of partners. For example, we're asking folks to focus on coordinating with their utilities early in the process of working on electrification, making that one of the very first things you do, and providing a lot of technical assistance around regulation, ordinance development, and permitting. So thank you to all of our partners who are making it possible to have that kind of expertise inform the structure of this new program called Charging Smart. The technical assistance through Charging Smart will be provided by regional partners so that they can know the context in which they're working the best. And the DOE has set a goal for the partnership to reach 50% of the US population through this program. So we will be working with communities of all sizes and types. The program will also continue to help remove barriers that limit any access to benefiting from EVs or access to electric vehicle charging. And there will be regular opportunities to join any cohorts. So in the past, in technical assistance, we've kind of asked folks to join at, say, June, and they wrap up their participation in the following July. But in the context of Charging Smart, communities will be able to join when it makes sense for them. Again, trying to make sure that we are respecting the expertise and the great work that's already been done in those communities to know what they need and when they need it. Finally, I'll just note that participants going through the Charging Smart program will be able to level up, which is an exciting thing. For example, if you participate and earn bronze level certification through Charging Smart, and then you do more wonderful work, you would be able to come back later and level up to silver and hopefully ultimately level up to gold. That is all that I have on our past work and our future exciting opportunities through Charging Smart, and I'm looking forward to any questions that you all may have. I'll turn it back to you, Christina.
Okay, great. If we all wouldn't mind turning our videos back on, we have a ton of questions. We won't be able to get to all of them, so I apologize in advance. If your question does not get answered, you can always email me and I will forward that question along to our panelists for them to answer. Okay, first question, and this is the age-old question. We're struggling with how to address signage on charging stations. I'm assuming by the question that we're talking about private charging stations where some of the companies will have advertising directly on the charging structure. And obviously you can't regulate what the content of that is, but perhaps even just the size of it. Some of them, I guess, are getting rather large. So the question is asking, like right now, we don't have a good way of reviewing these. Do you have any guidance?
I mean, certainly, it's a case-by-case basis. What we encourage is you look at the design, you figure out as a community what you feel is acceptable, that meets the health and safety objectives of the community, and then publish, diagrams of what is acceptable and unacceptable design. So it's important that the developer know ahead of time what they're expected to do regarding signage. So health and safety and signs there are certain signs that are very important for the health and safety for EV charging. So we certainly want to have that information available, but it's really up to the community how large they want, obviously, to a sign they want.
Anyone else have any comments on that? Okay. Next, how have, and I guess Ed, maybe we'll start with you. Have you looked at EV charging as the primary use versus an accessory use
So as I recall, and I did sort of glance at that question, the example was given, primary use being the primary use of the property and accessory use being subordinate to the primary use of the property.
Correct.
I think the question referred to what happens if you have a coffee shop and then you have EV charging, which is the primary use and which is the accessory use. I would typically suggest that the coffee shop is the primary use, but that is, and if it's EV charging hub, where you're expecting people from all over to come in and you've got lots of charging banks, then obviously that would make it a primary use. But we've not looked at a hard and fast rule to define for the gray areas, whether it would be a primary or accessory use.
Okay, thank you. This is a good question. I've gotten this question a lot, and it is with particularly out on the West Coast, but really anywhere. Brownouts and blackouts happen more and more. And even if you're working in your community and you don't have a good handle on the electric grid and the infrastructure, how do we handle that? Particularly, with the idea that exponentially electric vehicles are coming on the scene, and how do we deal with that? And then I have a follow-up comment after you answer that question.
That's a big question. I don't know if I'll really be able to do this question justice. I think a couple of things kind of play into this. I think that's where, lower power, level 2, even level 1 charging comes in. That's what's really going to be best for the grid overnight, where those vehicles are parked and sitting. That's when kind of there's the least amount of stress on the grid. So that's like I think a big factor in kind of like the broader energy picture here. Storage solutions, energy storage solutions are, I think, a big other aspect of this. We, at some of our supercharger sites, we have solar canopies and we have our mega packs sited as well. I think residential storage is also going to come into play. So I think it's going to be in kind of everything and above approach.
Tessa, if I may add to that, one thing I wanted to highlight as we've gone through our cohorts and technical assistance and we're looking towards this national program, Charging Smart, we've gathered best practices, and we'd recommend folks reaching out to your utility as early as you can in the process to have discussions about opportunities to collaborate. And I want to clarify, we are learning as we're going to a national audience the differences. So I mean utility or your retail electric provider or whatever other situation you have for you engaging with your power system. But the objective would be to reach out as early in the process if you're looking at charging, to make sure that there is the capacity and that you're looking for any collaboration opportunities on how to manage those things. And having those discussions proactively does make a big difference.
And just to, going back and discussing the importance of planning and involving the stakeholders in that planning process, you certainly want to involve the utility. And as corollary to that, you want to participate in the utilities planning processes. So when you hear about your local utility doing a integrated resource plan or integrated or any kind of EV planning, then it's really would be helpful for the locality to participate in that process, because that is going to have a lot to do with how successful we incorporate all this new load onto the grid.
There we go. Thank you. One thing that I wanted to mention about that, we had a webinar earlier this year that if you have questions regarding energy and energy storage, it was a really fascinating webinar. You can find it up on our website. And I think it was called, hold on, let me see if I can pull it up real quick. I can never pull, planning and zoning for battery energy storage systems. That's just another thing. If you're interested in the energy and the electrical conversation, that's a good webinar for you to take a look at. There's a couple questions coming through, and I've had this question too. We look at a gas station, they're very strategically placed off of highways, at intersections, major corridors where there's just a lot of traffic. Can we expect to see something like that with EV charger stations? Will they be maybe perhaps taking over gas stations? Are we assuming that everyone will just have them in their garages, or if they live in a multi-family building out on the, in the street, or that we assume they'll charge it either at home or at work or when they're at the grocery store? Or will there be just like banks of them here and there, just like a gas station? And in that case, what about amenities? Are we looking at amenities, or are we just really looking at like, this isn't a destination to charge your vehicle? Do it at home, or do it at work?
I'll take a first step of that question. I don't think it's necessarily going to replicate the gas station model one for one. I think that you are going to see some of these charging hubs that are, like I mentioned, that are larger. We have lots of those that are in really trafficked areas. But I think you're just going to be seeing chargers showing up in lots of different places. You may see them co-located with gas stations off highways. You're going to be seeing that more and more as states roll out their NEVI funding, because those need to be located within a mile of alternative fueling corridor. And a lot of off those highways, there are a lot of gas stations. So I think you're going to see them there. But you're also going to see them, like in commercial centers. You might see them in recreational zones or industrial zones, in mall parking lots, or that type of charging infrastructure there. So I think you're going to kind of see maybe everything and above. It's not exactly going to look like that gas station model. As far as amenities, for us, when we are looking at places to site our supercharger stations, amenities are really, really important. Amenities, and then also, safety of the locations, good lighting, things like that. We want people to feel safe. And that's because people are going to be sitting there for a little bit. They're going to be, they want to be able to get out, stretch their legs, and that, between 20 and 40 minutes that they might be charging their car, go out, go grocery shopping, go get a snack. So I think amenities will be important as well.
Thank you.
And I'll add,
go ahead.
Sorry, Christine, I just wanted to add, in terms of that residential charging, which will still be incredibly important, we did have some best practices around, going ahead and thinking about your building or zoning codes and what percentage of maybe multifamily developments that you would want to require being EV capable, EV ready, or EV installed. And those are very specific wonky terms, but they're pretty standard if you wanted to Google quickly. But those things are important to keep in mind up front, because the cost of retrofitting a building, especially as large as a multifamily, is much higher than doing those proactively. So one piece I think you'll need to be thinking about as you look at the comprehensive approach to how EV charging will be fully integrated into our, I want to say urban fabric, but it's more than just urban, of course. It's also rural, it's everywhere. As you're looking into these things, is proactively working on your codes to make sure that your new developments are already ready to support this important new use.
There's a lot of people concerned about fires, particularly, I know like most of us on the line probably, aren't charged with creating building codes particularly, but who do we need to talk to? What do we need to think about in terms of, we know that batteries can catch on fire, and They are difficult. Those fires are difficult to, to extinguish. What types of things do we need to think about, and what conversations do we need to have, and with who about this from the planner's perspective?
I can take a stab at this. I mean, one thing I'll say, I think that there's a lot of attention on this issue. There are more electric vehicles that are coming onto the road that are being added to the fleet. And I think that I would just caution a little bit that when we see an EV on fire, don't necessarily jump to the conclusion that that fire started in the battery. Most times that's going to be just a regular cabin fire like any internal combustion engine vehicle would be. So let's not jump necessarily to that conclusion, but we do want to make sure that there certainly is a risk with any vehicle. Typically, EVs actually have a lower risk than ICE vehicles, but it is really important for fire departments to be prepared because it is a different type of fire. And NFPA and UL have put out some really great guidance on this. UL is doing some new research at their testing facility in Chicago and on EV fires, how they react. And I think that that's going to really inform how fire departments are trained on this. So if you're a planner, first stop I would do is talk to your local fire department.
Christine, I'll just very quickly introduce myself since I just appeared. Hi, everyone. My name is Will Hewen. Good afternoon. Work with Tesla on the ground, working with jurisdictions in Northern California on the deployment side, working through design, construction, and moving our projects to open to public. Excited to be here. I'm also a former planner working with the City of San Francisco and City of Los Angeles prior to joining Tesla. Thanks.
Welcome. Another question. It is known that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that electric vehicles can weigh a lot more than conventional gas-fueled vehicles. And do we need to take into consideration anything from a safety perspective? Whether we have all of these electric vehicles on the road, like our roads, are they not going to last as long? When we're talking about safety guardrails, things like that, are they not going to provide the impact barrier that we're looking for? Are there any conversations that we need to have, to kind of prepare for, just generally speaking, a heavier vehicle on the road?
I can take a stab at this one. And again, I can only kind of speak from Tesla's perspective here. But I think generally, like in the US, like vehicles have been getting bigger and bigger throughout the decades. And at least for our vehicles, and you can do these comparison with other EV models, you can think of like a Tesla Model 3 or a Model Y. That's going to be comparable to weight-wise, kind of curb weight as it's known, comparable to a mid-size SUV, like a Honda Pilot or a Chevrolet Transverse. Some of our vehicles can, like our Model X or our Cybertruck, if you've seen that on your roads, those are larger. That's going to be more comparable to an F-150. But at least for Tesla and like our global fleet, I think 95% of our global fleet is made up of Model 3s and Model Ys. So I don't think it's necessarily going to be that much of a concern because again, those are going to be around the weight of a mid-size SUV.
Okay. I guess another thing to think about when we're working in a community and we're trying to advocate for increased charging stations, increased chargers, whatever it may be, and you have your decision makers who aren't totally sold on electric vehicles or feel as though that they are going to be the future wave of transportation, and they get into the discussions of, well, how often do batteries need to be changed out, and then do we need to think about our landfills and create more space in our landfills for batteries because they aren't able to be recycled. Just thinking about those things that folks might say to deter the conversation away from electric vehicles. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, there is a tremendous effort underway to recycle batteries and figure out best ways to recycle batteries. So we don't expect them to end up in landfills. There is so many important, like the rare earth metals, there's so many things that go into a battery that would be, we certainly would not want to send them to landfills. There are some cases where you could even, people are talking about taking a car battery and putting it into a home or something else, because the car battery, even if it's functioning at not less than optimal peak, it's still a much more powerful battery than most batteries you would see in a home for, say, solar and storage.
Yeah, and just to add on that, I'll find the question in the chat, but then in response, I'm going to drop a link to our annual impact report, which details out how we recycle our batteries. And then as far as the question of battery degradation, at least for Tesla, our batteries are designed to kind of outlive the life of the vehicle.
Okay. This is an interesting question. When we consider a parking space with an electric charger, is it a 1-for-1 in terms of parking spaces? Like in the example, it was like, will someone, let's say you're at the mall and you go to charge your vehicle. Will at any point, are you expecting to move to a regular space if you're going to be there for an extended period of time and you don't want to continue charging your vehicle? If that makes any sense, I get it. I get it. I understand. But is it sort of a 1-for-1? Thoughts, Ed?
So, well,
you can go ahead first, and I can take a second, Ed.
Sure. So this is really land use dependent. So let's say you talk about multifamily housing. Ideally in multifamily housing, you would have dedicated parking spaces so that a resident could park there and charge overnight and not have to worry about moving their car. You may have circumstances if you don't have dedicated spaces, then you might have you might have to set up the times or make arrangements where residents get certain access to certain spaces. So it gets a little more complicated. Then there's a case of on-street charging, and generally for on-street charging, you would have some kind of penalty if you were to remain in the space for an extended period of time. Again, there are exceptions to that. So maybe you have on-street charging that's near multifamily housing that doesn't have off-street charging, then you would maybe want to set it up so that they could park overnight. So there are lots of, I can go on and on, but that's kind of some of the considerations here.
If I could just add one more thing, just from Tesla's perspective, we want to create a really great charging experience for all customers. And it's not a great charging experience if you drive up to a Tesla supercharger station and there are no stalls available because folks are either charging or kind of like in the stores. So the Tesla app allows owners to remotely monitor their vehicle and alerts them when their charge is nearly complete, typically around 80%. And again, once it reaches the charge threshold. And we give them that nudge of, hey, your charge is done, and kind of for them to go move the vehicle. And we actually have recently instituted idle fees. So the vehicles aren't just sitting there, and so that we can get new vehicles into the stations.
Thank you. Mackenzie, can you, I think this was you, can you talk about there's a lot of questions about the certification. Just review it again.
Sure. Sorry, it took me a minute to come off mute. Yes. So there's a framework of 6 categories broken down into best practices. They're then broken down into actions. And that's what everything is built on. Each of those actions are eligible for, I'm going to talk about this in terms of Charging Smart, our forthcoming development. So each of the actions in the framework for Charging Smart will be eligible for general points and for EVs for all points. And that's about how you make sure you're removing barriers to access. So that's the basic framework. Built on that framework, we have a set of requirements that are specific to either bronze, silver, or gold certification levels. And in each of those set of requirements, there are basically 3 buckets. The first one is how many general points do you need to obtain? The second one is how many EVs for all points do you need to obtain? And then the third one is a set of specified actions that we ask each community to do. And the reason that we specify some actions is that we've seen them be incredibly impactful in terms of advancing EV readiness or reducing costs for getting EV charging put in place. So those are the 3 buckets: general points, EVs for all points, and some specified actions. Now, there will be some play left in the amount of points you have to achieve, where a community can select which actions they want to pursue and in what categories. The reason for this is that those local representatives are the experts on your community, so we wanted you to be able to make your own decisions. I'm not sure. This is a little bit easier with a graphic, but I can give you just a really quick rundown. I'll talk about the bronze level designation as an example so that you can get this in a more concrete terms. If you're going for bronze in Charging Smart, you'd have to do a few prerequisites, like doing your self-assessment that I mentioned earlier. Then you'd be asked to achieve 80 general points, and most of the actions or criteria in the framework are worth somewhere between 5 and 20 points each. So you can kind of get an idea of how many actions you'd be asked to complete. And you'd be asked to earn 15 EVs for all points. You could choose which actions you decided to advance in a way that removes barriers to get those points. Then we would ask the participant to achieve a certain number of their 80 general points from the education and incentives category, for example, and a certain value from the planning category. Beyond that, there would be, I believe it's 4 specified actions. An example of that is to meet with your utility to discuss EV collaboration opportunities. So it's things like that. And all of that still leaves a little bit of flexibility, 20 points remaining for you to select as you feel appropriate from the rest of the framework in any way you want to advance it. So I think that is a high level overview, but if there's a specific question, like, I'm absolutely happy to drill down further, or you can email me after this webinar and I'd be happy to talk it through. This is a really exciting development to be able to bring this to more states and then later this year to the entire nation. So we are just tickled at any point to talk about it.
Great. All right, it is time to wrap up. So thank you all for joining us. This was a really good discussion. And for the Transportation Planning Division, thank you also. I have no voice. It's time to go. Everyone have a great weekend. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see everyone next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you, Christine.
Thanks.